בוודאי, מה?
לא, יש לנו ליה אחרת גם.
אז אני לאה, והיא ליה? טוב, בסדר.
Leah and Leah. Or Leah and Leah. It's a difference. Okay.
Hi, Leah. Okay.
Okay. So hello, everybody. You can mute yourselves now, and then we'll move into, and I'll ask you to unmute when we get to the shares, to the screen share. Okay. The first story I wanted to read, can everybody see that now? Everybody can see that? Good. Okay. So I'll read the preface. This is from a wonderful compilation by Hershey Friedman back in the 1980s. The Elijah who appears to the rabbis is different from the Elijah in Scripture. He is quite friendly with many of the sages and even has halachic discussions with them. There are stories told about more recent sages that studied Torah with Elijah, Eliyahu. The term used is Gilui Eliyahu, the revelation of Eliyahu. Sages that had Gilu Eliyahu include Rabbi Yitzchak Luria, known as the Arizal, Baal Shem Tov, Yosef Karo, and many, many others. As a matter of fact, it isn't until the 12th century that we begin to see references to people being visited by Elijah. Or you have, in Joseph Caro's case, who is Joseph Caro? Anybody know? Why is he? Why is he important? He did the Shulchan Aruch, which is a prepared table. He reduced the Mishnah Torah really into 4 sections, and that's still studied today for people who become rabbis. And then he also was a mystic. So he was both a lawyer and a mystic. And he wrote a book called Magid Mesharim, where he claims that it was automatic transmission, or that it came through Elijah, that all he did was write, but he didn't know, he was not writing it consciously. It was coming out of a deep subconscious place of his. So Eliyahu plays those kinds of things. So who would like to read the story Elijah and the Messiah, which is the name of my new Netflix series, Elijah and the Messiah. And it goes on forever. It's a series that goes on forever because it takes forever to wait for the Messiah. So, okay. Who'd like to read?
All right. So Rabbi Yeshua B. Levy found
Ben. If it says B, it's Ben or Bar.
Oh, Ben Levy.
Right, it is right.
Found Elijah the prophet standing by the entrance of Rabbi Shimon ben Yochai burial cave, and asked him, "Will I be allowed to enter the world to come?" Paradise. Elijah replied, If this master here desires it. Rabbi,
who is the master he's talking about?
God.
No, go back.
Bar Yochai.
Bar Yochai. Okay. Shimon Bar Yochai is the classic, legendary, if you will, author of the Zohar. Okay. The Zohar, the book of illumination or splendor, the mystical commentary of the Torah, is attributed traditionally to Shimon Bar Yochai. And the book, if you look at it, it's an interesting thing, the Zohar, obviously. It deals with talking about Shimon Bar Yochai and his chevraya, his group that travels with him through Palestine, and they meet all kinds of interesting people. But we won't go into the Zohar. It's a very, very complicated book. Okay, so what does Eliyahu reply? If this master here desires it. Okay, so what does Rabbi Yeshua said?
Rabbi Yeshua then asked Elijah, when will Messiah come?
Go back a little bit.
Oh, okay.
After here desires it?
Yeah, if he desires it. Rabbi Yeshua said, I saw 2, Elijah and myself, but heard the voice of the third, the divine presence.
All right, this is where the divine presence comes in. Okay, go on.
Rabbi Yeshua then asked Elijah, when will Messiah come?
Now, by the way, this is what you're supposed to do. You should always be asking when the Messiah will come. Okay? I'll tell you a story about that after this story. Go on.
He replied, go ask him yourself. Rabbi Yeshua asked, where does he abide? And he replied, at the entrance of Rome. Rabbi Yeshua asked, but what sign will I be able to recognize him? By what sign will I be able to recognize him? He replied, He sits among the poor who suffer from various ailments, all of them untie, and then retie all their bandages at once. Messiah unties and ties his bandages one at a time, saying to himself, should I be needed, I must not be delayed.
And we're almost over the story.
Rabbi Yeshua went to him and said, peace on you, my master and teacher. The Messiah replied, peace on you, son of Levi. Rabbi Yeshua asked, when are you coming, master? And he said, today.
Today, okay. So we'll continue the story in a minute. So first of all, this is a very strange story, right? Okay. So what is the reason the Messiah says that he doesn't put and untie all of his bandages at once? Because he says, I might be ready to come, so I shouldn't be involved in something, right? See, I want to create time. But this is, why do you think it's Rome? Anyone?
There's a
Feel
lot of
free to-
poverty there.
What?
A lot of people could have a lot of poverty.
No, I don't think so. There's enough poverty everywhere. You don't have to travel to Rome. Baruch Hashem.
A
we got
place of
poverty
sin?
everywhere. What?
A place of sin?
Well, possibly, right? They're under Roman occupation, right? And that could be it, right? So they're saying that the Messiah is basically sits within that empire, and in a sense, will redeem it as well. I mean, that's the thing about our concept of the Messiah in Judaism, is that it's not the Messiah only of the Jews, the Messiah of the world. Very similar to where the Christians got their idea, right? That Jesus as Messiah is a Messiah for all people. So, who'd like to continue reading? Someone else. When Rabbi Yeshua returns,
I'll read.
please.
When Rabbi Yehoshua returned to Eliyahu, Eliyahu asked him what the Messiah said to him. Rabbi Yehoshua replied that he said, peace on you, son of Levi. Eliyahu told him that this meant that both Rabbi Yehoshua and his father were assured of a share in the world to come. Rabbi Yehoshua said to Eliyahu, he lied to me. He said he was going to come today, and he did not come. Eliyahu replied, what he meant was, today, if you will heed his voice. Today, if you will heed his
In
voice.
Psalms, it says, Hayom im kolo v'kolo tishma'u, meaning that's what today means. Today is when you are ready for it. And this is really one of the real interesting things about the Messiah. And remember, Elijah will be seen as we go on in our discussion, as we did already, as a harbinger of the Messiah. Okay? Well, Eliyahu is to tell us when the right time is going to come. So there are two different kinds of ideas about the Messiah. There are hundreds of ideas, and since no one knows, you can have more ideas. So it's okay, right? We don't know. One of them is that the Mashiach is something to be hoped for, and that he arrives as an act of grace. An act of grace, right? We have nothing we can do to do it. As a matter of fact, some of the rabbis have a problem with people who are trying to predict when the Messiah will come. Right? The Talmud says you can't predict it. When it's time, it's time. The second one, this is from a little bit later on, I think Rabbi Isaac Luria knows, the Messiah will come when you have done all the work to make the world messianic, and the Messiah comes as a signature to it. So the former one is more passive, correct? Passive. And the latter one is more active. The passive voice that you can't do anything to bring the Messiah was one of the reasons that the early Orthodox were very much against Zionism, right? That these people had the chutzpah to want to jump the gun and return to the land, etc., when they shouldn't have done anything. They should have waited for the Messiah, okay? And the other one is a more activist thing, right? If you're involved in tikkun olam, repairing the world, and the world gets repaired, then Mashiach is coming, right? So it's a different way of looking at it. Okay, let's read another. Any questions about that story before?
So how do they explain the Messiah, the Rabbi Schneerson?
They don't, because he didn't live in the time of the Talmud. No, I mean, Schneerson's claim, right, is part of the fact that there's always been a very strong messianic stream within Hasidism and within Kabbalah, that there's going to be this time when indeed the world is going to end. The fact that it gets attributed to the former Lubavitcher Rebbe is for many people very problematic. And of course, as you know, the community split to a certain degree. And if you remember, if you've ever been to Israel over the last 20 years, the big signs up ever since the Rebbe died, right? The Mashiach is coming, right? The Rebbe's Mashiach. But a lot of people are backpedaling on that, obviously. And they say the reason is because he didn't have any children. He was going to be the last of the line, so he must be the one who is going to solve it. But it's always very problematic, and because in our tradition, the Messiah who will come is not someone who will come from the dead. We do, you understand? It's not someone, it's a real person. It's a person who comes, right?
I thought it was more like a messianic period without.
That's the way it was. That's the way it was translated for moderns. We don't believe in that one guy coming on the white donkey and he's going to bring, right? But in the Christians' midrash, right? Christianity is a midrash. The early is a midrash. It's saying no. It's the Messiah will be resurrected. Okay, right? Jesus is resurrection. So in a sense, the only way I can really understand this in a way about the Lubavitch, about Chabad, was that it shows you if you live it long enough in a Christian environment, you might pick some stuff up. Because as I say, there's nowhere in a Jewish source. Now there are, I don't want to get too far off the track, but usually that's where the fun begins, off the track, is that there's a concept called the dual messiahship, D-U-A-L, not D-U-E-L, okay? Dual messiahship. There'll first be a Mashiach ben Yosef, Mashiach ben Yosef, or right, Ben Yosef. And this Mashiach ben Yosef will lead a war of good versus evil, and that he will be successful, but in the battle he will die. And then once that is successful, that war, then Mashiach ben David, the Davidic Mashiach, will arrive, and all of the things that we talk about of what's going on in the Messiah's time will start to take place. But let's not get too far afield, even though it's good to hear about the Mashiach every once in a while, right?
Yeah, oh, I have a question. Yeah. So, so Shabtai Zvi.
Yeah, much later, 17th century.
Okay.
Shabtai Zvi said he was the Messiah, right? The Sultan in Istanbul said to Shabtai Zvi at one point, he said, Shabtai, my friend, you can be the Messiah of the Jews without your head, or you can convert to Islam and you can keep your head. So putting discretion before valor, Shabtai Zvi keeps his head.
But there was
converts to Islam. What?
There was an interesting analysis by Gershom Scholem.
Sure, major book.
And who talked about the Shabtai Zvi represented sin through redemption, redemption through sin.
Right. I don't. It's getting us far afield, but he's talking about the fact that the effect of Lurianic Kabbalah, which talked about Yeridah Letzorech Aliyah, going down in order to come up, was one of the excuses used by Shabtai Zvi to explain his conversion to Islam, saying, "I'm going into the depths of the muck to pull out the sparks. So I'm going into Islam in order to liberate it and bring about the greater good." But that was an excuse that he used. We have that later also in Poland with Jacob Frank, about 100 years later, who claims to be the reincarnation of Shabtai Zvi. But let's move on to the next story. Who'd like to read Elijah the prophet?
Elijah the prophet said to Rav Yehuda, brother of Rav Salah Chassidah, The world will exist no fewer than 85 Jubilee cycles, or 4,250 years. And during the final Jubilee, the son of David, the Messiah, will come. Rav Yehuda said to Elijah, will the Messiah come during the beginning of the Jubilee or during its end? Elijah said to Rav Yehuda, I do not know. Rav Yehuda asked, will this last Jubilee cycle end before the Messiah comes, or will it not yet end before his coming? Elijah said to him, I do not know. Rav Ashi says, this is what Elijah said to him. Until that time, do not anticipate his coming. From this point forward, anticipate his coming.
So it's a very much a contradictory statement, which is basically, first of all, if you look at the retort of Rabbi Yehuda to Elijah, it's kind of a silly question, don't you think? Is he going to become the beginning or the end? What's the difference, really? So Rabbi Elijah says to him, I don't know. It's not important. What's important is that you should look forward to it, right? Because it is going to happen, but don't think it's going to happen right away. That's all, right away. So in the following story, Elijah reveals why the Mashiach has not come. He also reveals the hypocrisy of the people of Nahardea. Nahardea is a community in what is today Iraq. At one time was called Babylonia. It is not even permitted to have sexual relations with one spouse on the holy day. On this holy day, these people would have sexual relations with others on the Day of Atonement. Okay, that's sort of an interesting group. And the Gemara relates that the prominent men of Jerusalem would not sleep the entire night of Yom Kippur, but instead engage in Torah study so that the high priest would hear the sound of noise in the city and sleep would not overcome him in the silence of the sleeping cities. Let's read on this rather bizarre little story. And there are many bizarre stories, thank God. Okay, everybody's over 18 here, right? Okay, just checking. Who'd like to read? It was taught. Somebody who has not read.
It was taught in a Baraita that Abba Shaul said they would do so even in the outlying areas and stay awake all night in acknowledgement of the temple. However, the result was that they would sin, as the men and women would participate in games together to pass the time, leading to transgression.
If you know what games can do, right? Be careful about playing games. Okay.
Abaye said, and some say it was Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak who said, interpret that statement as referring to Nahardiyah, as Elijah the prophet said to Rav Yehuda, brother of Rav Salah Hasida. You have said and wondered, why has the Messiah not come? Why is that surprising? Isn't today Yom Kippur and relations were had with several virgins in Nahardiyah as the men and women stayed awake all night and that led to promiscuity? Rav Yehuda said to him, what did the Holy One, blessed be he, say about those sins committed by the Jewish people? He said, this is what God said. Sin lies in waiting at the door, and it is no wonder that men sin. He asked him, and what did Satan, the prosecutor, say about their sinning? Elijah said to him, Satan on Yom Kippur has no license to prosecute. From where is this idea derived? Rami Bar Chama said, the numerological value of the letters that constitute the word Hasatan is 364. 364 days of the year, Satan has permission to prosecute. On the remaining day, Yom Kippur, he has no permission to prosecute.
Okay, Babylonian Talmud, Tractate Yoma. So, of course, this is based on a system called gematria, which probably comes from the same word as geometry. And the idea is, of course, by now you know each letter of the Hebrew alphabet has a numerical value, and it's sort of for me, it starts to become a very weak drash when you have to resort to gematria. but it's sometimes very helpful. But this is a
But
good
this is
example.
wrong. This is
What?
not correct.
Why is it
I
not
think in
correct?
the Hebrew calendar, there are either 360 or 390 days.
No, there are 354 days
354, right?
in the lunar calendar.
Well, that's,
And the solar calendar, because we use the in our tradition, we use both the solar and the lunar, and we intercalate them. You know that famous word, intercalation. You don't get a chance to use that a lot. Intercalation. How do we intercalate the solar and the lunar calendar, and why do we? Our Muslim brothers and sisters do not intercalate and have a lunar calendar only. What's the difference between the two, and why would there be a need to intercalate them?
Adar.
Because of Pesach, right?
That's
Yeah,
what
a
it's-
lot
it
of-
has-
Why does it
has
say
to
about
be-
Pesach? How is Pesach referred to in the Torah?
It's
Chag
the first
Aviv.
month.
No,
It's
Chag
Chag
really-
Aviv. No, Chag Aviv.
right.
Aviv, which means in modern Hebrew spring. It probably also meant the month of the barley. Okay, barley harvest. So you wanted to keep Pesach always in that month of Nisan, and it should always be spring. Now, if you don't have any access to a solar calendar, there are very difficult ways of delineating seasons. So, for instance, our brothers and sisters in the Muslim world, Ramadan begins 11 days earlier every year until it comes all the way around the calendar. For us, we put in leap months 7 times in 19 years. We put in a leap month, which is called Adar Aleph.
Rainy.
It's not really Adar Bet. We had Adar Aleph, and that gives us an opportunity to make sure Passover will be in the spring. So we have a combined calendar of both seasonal calendar and lunar calendar. And sometimes the holidays themselves are based on the lunar calendar, okay? But the seasons are based on the solar calendar. Let's read on another story.
Moshe, you don't want to talk about Vitain Talum Atar?
No, it's okay. But just remember December 4th. They made up the date. December 4th.
December 8th. December 8th.
4th.
8th.
8th?
Yeah.
That's
yeah.
Hanukkah. You sure? I'll check with my sources. I think it's the 4th, but whatever. Rabbi Yossi, who I like to read.
Okay, I'll
These are
do it.
all Elijah stories in the Talmud, right?
Oh, okay. Rabbi Yossi said, I was once traveling on the road and I entered into the ruins of Jerusalem in order to pray. Elijah of blessed memory appeared and waited for me at the door till I finished my prayer. After I finished my prayer, he said to me, "Peace be with you, my teacher." I replied, "Peace be with you, my teacher and master." And he said to me, "My son, why did you go into this ruin and place yourself in danger?" I replied, "To pray." He said to me, "You should have prayed on the road." I replied, "I feared that passers-by might interrupt me." And he said to me, "You should have said an abbreviated prayer." At that time, I learned from Elijah the following 3 things. One must not go into a ruin. One may say a prayer on the road. And if one does say his prayer on the road, he recites an abbreviated prayer. Elijah further said to me, "My son, what sound did you hear in the ruin?" I replied, "I heard a divine voice cooing like a dove and saying, 'Woe to the children on account of whose sins I destroyed my house and burnt my temple and exiled them among the nations of the world.' And then he said to me, 'By your life and by your head.'" Oh, that's interesting. Ancient form of an oath.
Mhm.
Not only at this moment does the divine voice also exclaim, but 3 times each day does it exclaim thus. And more than that, whenever the Israelites go into the synagogues and houses of study and respond, "May his great name be blessed, the Holy One, blessed be he," shakes his head and says, "Happy is the king who thus prays in this house. What is there for the father who has exiled his children? And woe to the children who have been exiled from the table of their father."
So this is fascinating, right? There is this.
Yeah.
This is a really important point because it really became one of the great theological moves. Okay, to create Judaism as we know it today. Happened, of course, after the temple was destroyed. And the issue was, how could the temple be destroyed? It was a question of God's justice, etc., and mercy. How could that have happened, right? Why weren't we protected by it? So they really couldn't answer that, because we can't answer that question of why bad things happen to good people. It's a pretty tough question. But what they did was create this idea that God, too, is in exile with you. Right? The Shekhinah, the indwelling presence of God, is in exile. And that becomes an important theme, because later on, when you talk about in Kabbalah and elsewhere, the function of our prayers and our mitzvot and everything is to bring about a new unity, that has been broken between HaKadosh Baruch Hu and Shekhinah, the male and female principles. You find this in a lot of traditions, Eastern traditions, etc., that our job, our purpose is to create the healing. However, the Shekhinah suffers with us, right? We have not been neglected. We are not to be desolate, because there is tremendous empathy. And the empathy is that God has done that for us. To go into Shekhinah. Let me see if I have one more. Maybe not this one. Maybe not this one. No, not this one. Hold on a second. Let's go to these now. Okay, we have some others now. These are from Sepharia, and it includes a lot of interesting stuff. It includes the idea of commentaries upon what we read in the Bible. And here it goes. In Kings we read, remember, come out, he called, and stand on the mountain before God, and lo, God passed by. There was a great and mighty wind, splitting mountains and shattering rocks by the power of God, but the God was not in the wind. After the wind, an earthquake, but God was not in the earthquake. And after the earthquake, fire, but God was not in the fire. And after the fire, right, kol demama daka, the small, still voice, the soft, murmuring sound. Why does God do this? What is he attempting to help Elijah learn? And the Malbim, who's a traditional commentator, says this. Who'd like to read that? I'm bringing it up. And God said,
God said, come out. He showed him, that is, he showed Elijah that God was not in the wind, noise, or fire, but rather in the still, small voice. From this, God wished to reach his messengers not to make a great deal of a wind or noise or fire, like Elijah had been doing thus far in his zealousness for God, in that he closed the skies through bringing the drought and slaughtered the prophets of the Baal, because God sends his prophets to bring the nation close via the still small voice. They should bind the nations to God with cords of love and with soft words.
okay, so the Malbim and many of the commentators, are trying to figure out how Elijah what's the meaning of this particular event. And it was to teach Elijah that his zealousness, he's a zealot. We talked about it. He has no, there's no middle ground, right? You're either with me or against me. You're either for Baal or you're for God. And if you're for Baal, I'm going to wipe you out. He's not exactly a conciliatory figure. And he will be made into a conciliatory figure. And one of the ways, at least according to the Malbim, this commentator, was by teaching him that you don't find God in hullabaloo, or in wreckage, or in fire, or in murder, but you find it where you find it in the still small voice. What the still small voice is, I'll leave up to you. What do you think it is? Is it your own conscience? Right? Where does your still small voice come from? I ask you. Right? That's possibly the same place when it came from him. And this is trying to, in a sense, retrain him in a way from his past activities. So he continues on, if you remember, making all kinds of.
Moshe had a question.
Yes, please.
So weren't some of the other prophets like Jeremiah real, fire and brimstone characters? I mean, they didn't speak in small little voices. I thought.
No, they didn't. Matter of fact, but they were less extreme and more extreme. I'll give you an example. We have no examples beyond verbiage and verbal taunts by the book of Isaiah. There's no challenges and there's no, sort of debates that are going on. It's basically good old Isaiah telling you, don't screw up. If you screw up, this is what's going to happen to you, right? Good old prophetic stuff. The priest should have more kavanah. They should do it with not out of rote, but do it out of sincerity. All that stuff. The priesthood is corrupted, etc., etc. Kings are corrupted. All that stuff we get. Later on, we get some who are, much more zealous. I'll give you an example. Early on, we have Samuel, Prophet Samuel. You may remember him. When Saul returns from his campaign against the Amalekites, remember? And he was told, if you don't remember, it's a good thing to talk about. He's told the Amalekites are to be totally decimated. It's that's a extermination. And Saul comes back and he does not kill the main guy, Agag, the main guy who's the ancestor of Haman, right, according to the tradition. So what does Samuel do? He kills him, and in a pretty interesting way, he takes a sword and he chops him asunder. Samuel had a bit of anger management. No, I'm saying, but he was a zealot as well. Later on, you get less and less, and this is why Elijah is quite unique in this sense compared to the other prophets. Let's move on to something else. So he talks. Remember, if you remember, we read last week when Elijah and Elisha were walking, and they kept on walking and talking, and then a fiery chariot with fiery horses suddenly appeared and separated one from the other, and Elijah went up to heaven in a whirlwind. Okay, that's pretty dramatic. So in the tractate Nidarim, vows, this section comes up. Who'd like to read it? This is very strange that they put this together, but whatever. Let's just read it as a Elijah story. Okay.
In connection to the above incident concerning the poverty of scholars and their potential to become wealthy through remarkable circumstances, the Gemara relates an incident. Rabbi Akiva became betrothed to the daughter of Bar Kalba Savua. When Bar Kalba Savua heard about their betrothal, he took a vow prohibiting her from eating all of his property. Despite this, she went ahead and married Rabbi Akiva.
Stop. Why? What was wrong with Rabbi Akiva? Why would
he was poor.
Kalba Savua?
He wasn't raised in an educated rabbi's house.
He wasn't. He was a shepherd. He couldn't read. She met him and falls in love with him, the daughter of this great scholar and rich man. Okay, so he says, "I could do better for you. Don't marry this guy. And if you do, I'm going to disown you." That's basically what he did. He disowns her. Okay, go on.
Despite this, she went ahead and married Rabbi Akiva. In the winter, they would sleep in a storehouse of straw, and Rabbi Akiva would gather strands of straw from her hair. He said to her, "If I had the means, I would place on your head a Jerusalem of gold, a type of crown." Elijah the prophet came and appeared to them as regular person and started calling and knocking on the door. He said to them, "Give me a bit of straw, as my wife gave birth, and I do not have anything on which to live." Rabbi Akiva said to his wife, "See this man who does not even have straw? We should be happy with our lot, as we at least have straw to sleep on."
Okay. And this will become a little bit of a prototypical Elijah story in folklore. Elijah comes and he challenges you, or he gives you a lesson. In later folklore, he will leave either riches or he will see if you're hospitable. And here he taught them what? What did he teach them? What did Rabbi Akiva learn from this? We may not be well off, but there are people who are less well off than we are. If that's a relief to you, that's good. But I'm just saying it was a lesson that he learned. Okay. Here we get another story. And this is from the very famous Nachum Gamzu. Okay, let's read about him. The Gemara inquires.
The Gemara inquires, and why did they call him Nachum of Gamzu? The reason is that with regard to any matter that occurred to him, he would say, this too is for the good, Gamzu Letova. Once the Jews wished to send a gift, Doron, to the house of the emperor, they said, who should go and present the gift? Let Nachum of Gamzu go, as he is accustomed to miracles.
Mm.
Hmm.
I lost it. A miracle. They said they sent him with a chest full of jewels and pearls, and he went and spent the night in a certain inn. During the night, the residents of the inn arose and took all the precious jewels and pearls from the chest and filled it with earth. The next day, when he saw what had happened, Nachum of Gamzu said, this too is for the good. When he arrived there at the ruler's palace, they opened the chest and saw that it was filled with earth. The king wished to put all the Jewish emissaries to death. He said, the Jews are mocking me. Nachum of Gamzu said, this too is for the good. Elijah the prophet came and appeared before the ruler as one of his ministers. He said to the ruler, perhaps this earth is from the earth of their father Abraham, as when he threw earth, it turns into swords, and when he threw stubble, it turns into arrows. As it is written in the prophecy that the sages interpreted this verse as reference to Abraham, his sword makes them as dust, his bow as a driven stubble. That's from Isaiah. There was one province that the Romans were unable to conquer. They took some of the earth and tested it by throwing it at their enemies and conquered that province. When the ruler saw that the earth indeed had miraculous powers, his servants entered his treasury and filled Nachum of Gamzu's chest with precious jewels and pearls and sent him off with great honor.
Okay, that's a typical Elijah story. He shows up, and what does he do? He saves the day. He's always saving the day, right? Nachum of Gamzu would probably had his head cut off, but Elijah appears. How does he appear? He appears as one of
Ministers,
the king's advisors, right? Not as a foreigner. He's able to transform himself, transmogrify himself in different ways and different shapes. So this is another Elijah story. And there are many of these that we read. Here's another one. Rabbi Yosef of Tzipori, Sepphoris, for those who've been there. Please, somebody who hasn't read.
Rabbi Yossi taught Father Elijah, a deferential and affectionate characterization for Elijah the prophet, was difficult. Elijah was accustomed to coming and revealing himself before Rabbi Yossi each day. He was obscured from him for 3 days and did not come. When he came again, Rabbi Yossi said to him, why did the master not come? Elijah said to him, you denigrated me when you called me difficult. Rabbi Yossi said to Elijah, this example that is before us illustrates the point, as my master was being difficult by not coming those days.
So he's having a little respect with Elijah. So that's also possible to do with Elijah, is to have sort of a very personal relationship with it. And now I'm going to read a story to you. Yes, please. Quick question.
The only question, these little stories are incorporated in the Talmud.
They're all in the Talmud. As you know, the Talmud has 2 parts to it, right?
Yeah.
It has the Mishnah,
and
the Mishnah is pretty much a law code.
Okay.
Then it has the Gemara, which finishes the Mishnah by expanding upon it, asking halachic questions, halakha, meaning why does the Mishnah say X and not Y, which is why Jews were lawyers for so long, right? Why does the text say this and not that? But it also has wonderful, rich associative thinking where stories are told, and that's
Mhm.
called Agadah.
Agadah, yeah.
Agadah. So you have halacha and Agadah,
Agadah, yeah.
and a number of, there's a famous collection called Yalkut Shimoni, where a fellow named, I believe it was Ben Chaviv, early on, took all the Agadah out and put it in the order of the Talmud and left the halacha. Why? Because there were many people who were not expert enough to study the halachic points of the Talmud, which are very complicated. So he took all the Agadic material and he put it in one big book. And there were Jews who was their practice. They were not Talmud scholars, but they were Agadic scholars.
Oh.
And then in the beginning of the 20th century, a very famous guy did the
Bialik
same
do this?
thing.
Yeah.
Bialik, Sefer Bialik.
Sefer Agadah.
Sefer Agadah, the book of legends, which I
Legends.
recommend to everyone. So
Right.
he too tried to put together Agadot, which he felt would speak to the generation of these new Zionist youth. So I'm going to read you a story. You mind if I read a little bit?
Please.
You don't mind? Okay. This is from that wonderful book that I mentioned to you. So I was glad I found at least one of the stories online. This book is out of print. I went to Amazon to see how much it would cost today. It would be $111 if you wanted a hard copy, and if you wanted others, it's been out of print for a while.
And Moshe, there is
Yes.
a used books. Amazon is not the only place for used books. I'll say that, and you
Good.
might find a better price elsewhere.
Well, all I'm saying is if you're interested in this book and you want it, there are ways to find it. Thank you. So it's called A Blessing in Disguise. Many years ago, it happened that there was a good couple who lived in Baghdad. The husband studied Torah and performed mitzvot, giving charity to the poor and helping whoever needed work. The wife, too, was a good woman, distributing charity and offering hospitality to anyone who knocked on their door. They had one son, and the parents taught him the ways of God and to follow the commandments as they did. When the son grew old enough to marry, his parent arranged a marriage with a good family who had a beautiful and learned daughter. At the wedding, everyone, the rich and the poor, were invited to celebrate in the simcha. However, as time went on, the couple still had no child. It was hard for them to see other young couples with their babies. At night, they wept bitter tears because they had no child to hold in their arms. And during the day, they saw the looks of pity in the faces of the people, and they would go out into the marketplace and synagogue only when it was necessary. It was soon to be Pesach. They prepared everything according to the tradition. On the night of the first Seder, they read the Haggadah, and as she heard the words for the Exodus from Egypt, the wife began to cry. Her husband looked up and saw her tears, and he understood why she was weeping. He spoke gentle words to her, and as he had said to her often before, he once again repeated, "My wife, do not worry. HaKadosh Baruch Hu, the Holy One, blessed be He, will not forget us. We will have a child." Suddenly, they heard a tapping at the door. And when the husband opened the door, they saw a weary traveler. Without hesitation, the couple invited his old man to enter and join them for the Seder. They sat, recited the Haggadah together, ate together, enjoyed a lively discussion about the story of the Exodus. And when the old man got up to leave, the couple invited him to stay the night. But he insisted that he had to leave. And as he rose from his place, he did not thank the couple, but spoke these words instead. "I asked HaKadosh Baruch Hu that I may merit to visit you next Pesach at the Seder, and that your table will be filled with disorder at the time." Disorder. The couple was astonished and somewhat angry that this traveler had said such an ungracious thank you. However, they didn't want to offend him, since he was their guest, and they'd offer him hospitality with their whole hearts, without a thought for a reward or a thank you. Well, soon after Pesach, the wife knew she was expecting a child. A beautiful child was born 3 months before the next Pesach, and they knew great joy. When Pesach arrived, the couple once again sat down to begin the Seder and reading of the Haggadah, and this time they held the baby on their laps, and the child behaved like all children do. He wiggled and laughed, and he reached for the glass of wine, then he pulled at the tablecloth, he tore a page from the Haggadah, he squealed when he threw a plate down, And what did the parents do? They behaved like all new parents. They laughed with joy and watched with laughter and spoke with delight at their child's work.
Dogs.
And the Seder was in disorder and certainly not beseder. Suddenly, there was again a tapping at the door, and when they opened the door, the couple saw the same traveler who had come the year before. They recognized him and again invited it in. But suddenly, as they stared at the man and also at the table, they recalled his words, his thank you, and understood for the first time that those words had really been a blessing. The couple began to talk at the same time, thanking the old man for his blessing, which had come true, and asked for forgiveness because they had regarded his words in a different light. The old man smiled with a beautiful smile and said, "There is no need to ask my forgiveness. How could you have understood my words at the time? May you be worthy to bring your child to study Torah, to do good deeds, and to bring your child to the chuppah." And the old man disappeared. Then the couple understood that the traveler had been the prophet Elijah. May his name be remembered for good. That's a very typical kind of story, very typical kind of story. Okay. Let's go on to the Mechilta, which is a commentary on the book of Exodus. And who'd like to read that? Mechilta the Rabbi Yishmael. Another example of prophets. Yes.
We find there to have been three kinds of prophets. One claimed the honor of the Father and the Father of the Son. Another, the honor of the Father, but not the honor of the Son. Another, the honor of the Son, but not the honor of the Father. Jeremiah claimed the honor of the Father and the honor of the Son. Was VIZ?
This is from Eicha. See Eicha 342.
Right. We have offended and rebelled the honor of the Father. You have not forgiven the honor of the Son. Therefore, his prophecy was doubled, Jeremiah 36:33. And many other words were added to them, the prophecies of Jeremiah. Eliyahu claimed the honor of the Father, but not the honor of the Son in 1 Kings 19:10. I have been very jealous for the Lord, the God of hosts, etc. And what is stated in this regard? And the Lord said to him, "Go, return on your way to the desert of Damascus. And Jehu, the son of Nishmi, shall anoint you to be
Nimshi.
Nimshi
Right.
shall anoint you to be king over Israel, and Elisha, the son of Shaphat, shall you anoint to be a prophet in your place." What is the intent of this? He does not desire your prophecy because you do not claim the honor of Israel. Jonah claimed the honor of the Son, but not the honor of the Father. What is stated in that regard? And the word of the Lord came to Jonah a second time, saying, "What is the intent of this? We will speak with him a second time, but not a third, for he did not claim the honor of the Lord." Reb Yochanan said Jonah went on that voyage only to cast himself into the sea, as is written. And he said to them, "Lift me up and cast me into the sea."
Okay, so what is this all about?
I don't know.
What does honor to the Father and honor to the Son mean? Excuse me one second. Go ahead. In Yiddish, we have an
Reb
expression.
Moshe, is there any way to make the font bigger?
Yeah, I
Let
can't.
me see. Yes, I probably can. I think.
For old eyes.
There you
That-
go.
That's the biggest I can make it, I think. How's that?
That's better.
Is that better? Okay.
Mhm.
The Father is God, the Son of the people of Israel. Okay, so there's an expression in Yiddish that a person is zu Gott und zu Leut. Leut is also a word in German, right? To God and the people, right? That there is this balance that at one point that the prophet who defends the people of Israel, honors the Son, and he also says God's word. He's also honoring the Father. So Elijah was a guy who was zealous for God, but he did not necessarily defend the people. That was one of his reasons he had to be transformed. He missed the point of what the prophet was supposed to do. The prophet was supposed to honor both the Father and the Son, right? He had to be devoted to God, but also very, very aware of what the conditions were of the people who he lived among. And that seems to be a good thing for all leadership, not only of being a prophet, is you got to understand what your highest ideals are, but you also got to remember who people are. And sometimes the highest ideals and people don't exactly match. I don't know if you've ever seen that in your life. It's quite possible they
But
don't match.
remember that he save that boy's life when he was staying.
Yeah, right. That's true.
So
One, he had one. So that's one. Okay, that's one. But in general, you don't hear him as a defender of Israel. Now we get to the place which explains how that affects the tradition that Elijah comes to every bris. Okay, let's read on. God said to Elijah. Someone who has not spoken, please. Anyone in the back there? Don't be afraid. Sheila, give a read. You read. Have you still been studying English as a second language? You're good now. You're good now, right? Unmute. God said to Elijah.
God said to Elijah, because you've accused the people forsaking my covenant, you will have to be present at each circumcision and then report to me how my people observe the covenant. Elijah answered, Master of the universe, since I am jealous of the Lord and since I cannot tolerate any kind of sin or sinner.
Jealous can also be zealous, by the way. Jealous and zealous, similar root, okay?
Uh-huh.
Okay.
What will I do where the father of the child is a sinner? Certainly I cannot forbear him. God answered, in such a case, I will forgive the sins of the father. Elijah argued again. Suppose the father and the moil are both sinners. What shall I do then? God said, I will forgive the sins of both of them. Elijah importuned further. Suppose all the people attending the circumcision rite are sinners. What will I do then? God answered, even then will I forgive the sins of all of them.
All right, so here you see the issue, right? Elijah can't bear people who make mistakes. Jonah, if you remember, didn't want to go prophesy because he didn't want to embarrass the people, because the people of Nineveh had done repentance and the people back in the home were not doing it. So he was interested in protecting the people and not embarrass them, etc. Elijah had short shrift for anybody who was a sinner. Now, this is a beautiful thing. God says, look, that's not why we're here. If this is a group of people that have committed themselves to carrying on the covenant, the Brit, then that doesn't matter who they are. They are doing something that basically contradicts what you said to me earlier, Elijah, that they're all sinners and they're throwing away the covenant. But look, even these people who you consider sinners, I forgive them because they're coming and they're carrying on the tradition. By the way, there is no bris I ever go to where I wouldn't say, I don't know, we're all sinners, right? We're all sinners. There's nobody who's not. So this is a good example of how Elijah had to be taught. And how is he taught? He shows up at every bris. Every bris he shows up to be able to say, I was wrong. I was wrong in what I said. Now, since Jonathan Sachs passed away, we talked a little bit about him. I thought that this would be an interesting thing to read. And it's from an excerpt from an article called "What Does This Avodah Mean to You?" Now, who says that in the Seder?
Rasha.
The Rasha, the
Yeah, the
so-called
wicked
evil
son.
child, the evil child. He says, what does this mean to you? He excludes himself, right? Rather than saying, like the other sons, what does it mean for us that we're sitting here, right, having a Seder? What does it mean to you? So Rabbi Sachs says this. Who'd like to read? America. Do I have to call on somebody? Okay. Okay, yeah, Evelyn, go for it.
Unmute. Okay, America is different. Taken as a whole, the population of the United States is one of the most religious in the world, but the Jewish community is significantly less so. 56% of the general population, but only 26% of Jews describe religion as an important feature in their lives. 69% of the general population believe in God, but only 34% of Jews. 50% of the general population attend a place of worship monthly, only 23% of Jews. This is a long-standing phenomenon, and it was already remarked on by sociologists in the 1960s, but it remains a striking anomaly. Let me suggest one possible explanation. Throughout a century of reflection on how to sustain Jewish identity in an open secular society, the case has often been made that we need to make Judaism easier. Why make the barriers so high, the demands so steep, the law so rigorous and demanding? So one by one, the demands were lowered. Shabbat, kashrut, conversion were all made easier. As for the laws of Tehorat HaMishpacha,
Those are the laws of family purity, of sexual abstaining from sexual relations for a number of days a month during the menstrual cycle and days after. Okay.
In many circles outside Orthodoxy, they fell into abeyance altogether. The assumption was that the less demanding Judaism is to keep, the more Jews will stay Jewish. To show that this is a fallacy, I once asked a mixed group of observant and non-observant Jews to list the festivals in order of difficulty. Everyone agreed that Pesach was the hardest, Shavuot the easiest, and Sukkot somewhere in between. I then asked, which festivals are kept by the greatest number of Jews? Again, everyone agreed. Pesach was kept by most, Shavuot by the least, with Sukkot in between. There was a pause as the group slowly realized what it had just said. It was counterintuitive, but undeniable. The harder a festival is, the more people will keep it. The proof is Yom Kippur, by far the most demanding day of all, and by far the best attended in synagogue. This is not an isolated phenomenon. Those familiar with the work of behavioral economist Dan Ariely, for example, will know of the experiment he performed in which he invited a group of people to make origami shapes. Their work was then demonstrated, and participants and bystanders were asked how much they would pay for them. On average, the people who made the models were willing to pay 5 times as much as were the bystanders. He then did a second experiment similar to the first, but with one difference. This time there were no instructions as to how to make the models. The task, in other words, was even harder. This time the makers were prepared to pay even more. His conclusion? The tougher the challenge and the more skill and time we have invested into it, the more we value it. The sages said this long ago. Lefum, according to the effort is the reward. A host of recent studies of outstanding achievement, among them Malcolm Gladwell's Outliers, David Schenk's The Genius in All of Us, Jeffrey Colvin's Talent is Overrated, Matthew Syed's Bounce, and Daniel Coyle's The Talent Code have shown precisely this, that high achievement is the result of tireless dedication, at least 10,000 hours of it, and deep practice. That is why people arrive to get into the great universities or win an Olympic medal or a Nobel Prize. It is also the phenomenon that Mihaly
Sikai. If you say Sikai, you can't pronounce it. It's Hungarian. You can't pronounce it.
or
Polish.
flow or peak experience, the point at which a challenge tests us to the limit, calling for total focus. To be sure, there are some challenges that are simply too hard and leave us feeling overstressed and inadequate. But in general, we value most highly what tests us most deeply. Sometimes, of course, the opposite is true. We appreciate the one-click buy, the one-stop shop, the instant communication, and the computer search that takes microseconds. But this applies when we are seeking convenience, not when we are seeking meaning. If what we are looking for in a religion is convenience, no one in his or her right mind would recommend Judaism. But if we're looking for meaning, no religion has ever been more profound.
But that's a beautiful piece.
Thank you for
Beautiful
giving me the
piece.
opportunity to read this, because actually I've been reading a book about some of these ideas by somebody who grown up as a liberal Jew, and she in her 30s became much more observant.
Right. Yes, not an uncommon phenomenon. Hold on, I'm looking for one more text. Let's see if I can find
Oh,
it.
goody, there's the text we want.
No. Single circus. One second. Where is it? Yes, Leah Abrams is going to read us a Midrash on Elijah. Let's see if I can share it with everybody. That would be good if I could. Here it is. Okay, I'll try to. I don't know if I can make this bigger, but I will try.
Yeah, a little hard on Jadars.
Okay, how's that?
No, that's
Big
good.
enough?
Yeah.
Or is that too big?
No,
How's that?
that's good. No. the
Okay,
other-
you go for it, Leah. Give it to us.
Okay. So I was taking a class on writing Midrash. And as we understand from what Reb Moshe has been saying, sometimes Midrash is like the backstory. For example, there's a story that Abraham's father was making idols, and when he was out of the store, Abraham smashed all the idols and put the hammer in the last remaining idol. And when his father said, why did how could this happen? He said, well, the idol did it. Because Abraham came to realize that idols couldn't be the answer. So when I was studying this class in Midrash writing, we were studying Elijah, and we were asked to write our own Midrash. And one of the things you probably have noticed that whenever there's a Midrash, the rabbis or the scholars always look for proof. And sometimes the proof is from something that happened earlier in the Torah or later, it doesn't matter, but they always have a way of finding proof. So here is my Midrash relating to what we were reading the first week. I think it was the first week on the big showdown between Elijah and the prophets of Baal. Elijah challenged the priests of Baal to a test of the power of Baal against the power of God. Each would build an altar and call upon his God to bring fire. According to our tradition, withholding of rain is a punishment from God. And I cite the reference there, so I'm not going to read those. Since Elijah had come to the Jewish people to help bring rain, first he needed his people to atone and to restore their belief in HaKadosh Baruch Hu, the Holy One. Blessed is he. Elijah can only accomplish this by public repudiation of Baal and his sinful followers in the context of animal sacrifice. As it was explained in Genesis, a cut or dismemberment of a sacrificial animal represents a contract between God and the descendants of Abraham. And the sacrifice itself, it says, for the life of the flesh is in the blood, and I have given it to you for making atonement for your lives on the altar. For as life, it is the blood that makes atonement. So the two animals to be sacrificed were penned together. As they stood in the pen, a spark of recognition passed between them. They had been born twins, but separated at birth. As the great Kabbalistic Rabbi Abraham of Abulafia said in his famous treatise, Sefer Chaye Olam Haba, the Book of Afterlife, the Hebrew word for twins is te'umim, and the same letters form the words Yom Emed, or Day of Truth. The intuitive knowledge of the truth of their relationship did not endear them to each other, and so there was truth between them, but no harmony. They were both aware they were descended from the mating many generations in the past of the bull used as the form for the golden calf, and a holy, unblemished red heifer whose sacrificial ashes were dissolved in water and prescribed by God for purifying those who were made unclean by association with the dead body. The bull to be used by the priests of Baal had the same temperament as his ancestor, whose body had been shaped with molten gold. He was also aware that King Jeroboam had not long before placed golden calves in 2 cities where the Jews worshiped. His twin, a female virgin red heifer, was a rarity. Very modest and humble, she knew that her life was associated with the coming of the Messiah. And by the way, that is the legend. When they find a red heifer, it means the Messiah will be there soon. The red heifer tried to restrain her brother from false pride, only to have him try unsuccessfully to mock her and gore her. I do not think our parents would approve of your high and mighty ways, she chided as she moved to avoid his horns. We bulls were worshipped in Egypt. Why shouldn't we continue to be gods? Asked the overconfident one, preening around the enclosure. Elohim means many gods. Why can't there be a Yahweh and Ka? After all, in ancient Egypt, Ka meant life force and bull. The red heifer spoke quietly of her hope for the Messiah and wished her brother would look forward to the moment of redemption instead of aggrandizing about his heritage and his genealogy. When our great-great-great-great-great-grandfather, covered with a veneer of Israelites' gold, was destroyed by Moses, his ashes were ground up and the Jews who worshiped him were forced to drink the poison and die, she reminded him gently. As the prophets of Baal came for their bull, they did not know that he still had some elements of gold in his veins from his forebears, and that he could not be an acceptable sacrifice, no matter how hard they would pray for him to burn. When Elijah came for his red heifer, he sensed the desire of that animal to be sacrificed for the greater good of the Jews to prove God's power. And the red heifer was transformed into a korban olah, like the first sacrifice of Noah, totally consumed in flame through God's will. And God smelled the sacrifice and was satisfied with his people's show of repentance and brought forth rain. Don't all talk at once. So that's the story that I made up.
Beautiful. Thank you.
You're
Thank you.
welcome. You're very welcome.
Beautifully told.
Incredible.
Thank you.
Well,
Very creative.
Well, I was thinking, you always hear these expressions about twins separated at birth. And I love that thought. Plus, I also, there's so much Midrash already about the golden calf, and then there's a Midrash about the red heifer. So I put it all together.
Beautifully done.
Thank you.
Really.
It was a pleasure to read it to you.
Where are you?
Yashar kochech, Leah.
Toda rabah.
Honestly, Yeah, it's a lot of research there. I have to reread it to really figure out what you were talking about.
Yeah, there's a lot of research there. It's
Yeah.
true.
Okay, I'm unmuted. That's great. Well, thank you. That was a wonderful piece of work. I think it's brought in a lot of different objects. It's ironic. I'll give you a bit of irony, in it, which I'm sure you saw, is that the golden calf, if you recall, was meant to be ground down, right, and thrown into the water, right?
Right.
And you
that's what I
get the
said.
first decaffeinated coffee that way, by the way. But
Oh my God.
I'm sorry, forgive me. But
It's very good.
But rather than doing what the ashes of the red heifer does, you notice that? I'm sure you did. The waters of the golden calf bring death, and the waters of the red heifer bring life. But it's the same exact process.
Right.
You still grind it down and put it in the water, and people drink. So it's the same methodology, but the kavanah is different. That's really where it comes out to. That both the prophets of Baal and Elijah had the technology. They knew how to build altars. They knew how to slaughter animals. They've done all that stuff. But because it was the descendant of the molten calf, it was gold. Now that's interesting. What does gold do? Gold perverts. Gold can corrupt.
Exactly.
And that's what happens, of course, that it was perverted. Thank you very, very much. That was terrific. That was terrific.
You.
I have one or two more things I want to share with you. I just got to find them. If I find them, I'll be happy. I'll be happy. Where is it?
While you're looking for it, I just want to say, don't look for the Messiah, the Mashiach to come this year. Transportation and air flights, nothing's moving. Even donkey.
That's true.
Even his donkey is in quarantine.
You're right. You're right. Hold on. Let me see if I can find this.
Moshe,
Yes. Hold on.
are you going to discuss Elijah's other role in the Seder?
Yes, we will deal with that next time. It's an interesting story, and it's you know, when you think about it, a lot of things in Jewish tradition. Remember, nothing comes out really all in one shot. You know, all ready made. Things come out, and then people take it, and it evolves. It evolves. So our Haggadah that we now have in a printed book, right? And now we have new variations of it. It's to show you again how the evolution is continuing. It's not stopping, right? It took a long while to get there. And Elijah doesn't really figure prominently in the Haggadah until a section is added in the medieval period. And then Elijah becomes well known. And the way they add it was I guess I'm doing it now, so I might as well share it with you. Hold on.
Well, I was referring specifically to the validation I gave to my thoughts about the fact that in my home and in Seder's in Portsmouth, New Hampshire,
right,
Elijah we were threatened with the fact that if we fell asleep during the Seder, Elijah would not only drink from the cup, but he would put us in a sack and take us away from the table.
Wow.
Oh my.
Elijah as bogeyman. Wow.
Yes, but I sent you proof of that.
Yes, it's right. Quite interesting, and it ties in with a little bit, I think, with. Hold on a second. Elijah the Talmud. No, I think that's it. Yeah, it ties in with a lot of other things that might have been going on at the same time, if you will, in Eastern Europe, where I think this myth became much more strong than even in the Middle East. But I've never heard it. I've never heard it to him being seen as someone who's going to punish, et cetera, et cetera. The only thing I heard is the reason you do the afikomen is to keep the kids awake.
Well, that's it.
That I heard.
And it's also to encourage the kids to stay.
Right.
That's what it's about.
Not to take the sack out of the bag. There is also a halachic reason why why it's why we do it. And the question is that there are 5 words in the story of the Exodus dealing with 5 different kinds of liberation.
Mhm.
And the reason we have 4 cups is that one is for each word that we use, hotzeti, galti, etc. But there's also a 5th word. So the rabbis argued, as they often do, should there be 5 cups at the Seder or 4? And in order to resolve that issue, they said, we'll put a symbolic cup on the table to fulfill the question of whether 4 or 5, right? Later, that got associated with Elijah. Why? Because in the Talmud, and I can't find it right now, in the Talmud, one of the roles of Elijah is, and I mentioned this briefly last time, I believe, is to, when there are arguments that can't be solved, it's called teku. I mentioned that. Teku. It's like a tie. We don't know who's right. And they say that teku is really the Rashi Tevot, an acronym for Tishbi Yavo Yitaretz Bayot Kushiyot V'Bayot. So it says that Elijah will come to Tishbite, right? Tishbi, he will come to settle all questions and matters. So in a sense, Elijah's coming to the table to say, you're both right. Everybody's right. You drink the 4 cups, but have the 5th cup there, and et cetera, et cetera. But I think also the idea was that Elijah, being the harbinger of the Messiah, since the Passover Seder is a paradigmatic scene of redemption, right? The paradigm of being taken out of slavery, right? Then having Elijah be there is also a harbinger of what you hope when you say L'Shana Haba, B'Yerushalayim, you're saying B'Yerushalayim, that is no longer, if you will, a place of bondage and captivity. Also, there is you ever hear the idea of Shmura Matzah, anybody?
Yeah.
Okay, Shmura Matzah means guarded matzah. That's what it literally means, guarded matzah. What does that mean? It means that they're so punctilious, which is a great word. It's a great Scrabble word. You get a lot of points. So punctilious that they would watch the wheat from the time it is harvested until it was made into grain to make sure that there was no possibility of any moisture to come and begin to have this stuff rise up, right? Because you're supposed to eat unleavened, not leavened bread. So that evening of watching was called Leil Shimurim, guarded night, and then the matzah made from that is Shmura Matzah. But also, Leil Shimurim means something else. If you recall, in the story of the Exodus, before the night of the 10th plague, the Israelites who are requested to do what? Remember?
Blood on the door.
Right, to slaughter the lamb, put blood on the doorposts, and then the plague would pass over them, and that's where we get the word Passover, right? Pasach, Passover. So the blood was a mixture of 2 things. And remember, you're all over 18. It was supposed to be the blood of the lamb and the blood of circumcision, because no one was permitted to participate in the Seder. It wasn't a Seder, in that event, unless they were circumcised. So that's one of the reasons Elijah comes as well, to remind us. And that's why until very recently, people never had non-Jews at their Seders. In my home, you would never have a non-Jew at a Seder, ever. Then it became required. Pretty much.
I thought it was
And
the high
especially
fashion.
if it was a priest. It is the fact. Now the big fashion is break fast.
Rabbi,
That's big.
Rabbi, can I tell
I've been
you?
invited to a break fast. I'm really on the in. What?
I have to tell a funny.
Yeah, who is speaking?
It's Leah. It's Leah talking.
Oh, Leah, yes.
So
yes.
I had never been away from my home for a Seder, but as it turned out, I ended up going to China with a friend, and it was going to be during the Seder. And I was you know, it was very hard for me to make the decision. But then my friend and I, well, she was Jewish too. So I brought matzah, I brought other things, and we were on a boat on the Yangtze, the first Seder. And I knew that there were other, and we also had our own version of a Haggadah. So we knew we weren't going to do the whole thing. And one of the things that was funny, and then I'll tell the part that wasn't so funny for me, but the social director on the boat, he wasn't Jewish, but he was from Brooklyn, so he knew about Seders. And I said, well, I need a lamb shank, or I need some kind of a bone. So the chef came out with like 50 picked clean chicken wing bones. But meanwhile, the thing that I felt really sad about was, so we let the people in our group know, you know, that we were having this Seder at our table and in advance. And the only people who wanted to come to the Seder were the non-Jews.
There were other Jews on the ship.
Yes, in our group.
Oh,
Wow.
And to me, I
Wow.
just couldn't believe it. But I mean, maybe I'm still naive. I don't know. But I even asked one person, and she said, oh, I had enough of that growing up.
Oh, no.
well, obviously they
No,
booked a ship during Passover.
I
So
guess so. I guess so. But you'd still think that if they had the opportunity, they would
Sure.
have
Yeah.
done it.
It's
But it
different
was-
in many different, you know, I was away on a meditation retreat once, and I asked permission if it's okay if I light candles for the Sabbath. And sure enough, by the time I was standing there, there were 45 people around me. Because you find, where do you find Jews? You go to Buddhist retreats, you find a lot of Jews there. And they
Right.
were all very thrilled. They were all very thrilled because many of them didn't have the foresight to say, I really want to continue my observance, even though I'm in this environment. And no one really had a problem with it. In this particular brand of Buddhism, almost everybody who started it was Jewish. So they understood what the thing
Well,
was.
the Christians who were at our table were thrilled too, because they had never
Yeah,
been at a
right,
Seder.
right.
So
No, I mean, it's changed very dramatically. I remember at All Saints Church, you know, All Saints on Beacon and what's the street there?
Dean Road.
And Dean Road, you know, the big church there,
yeah.
Beacon and Green. So one of our friends, Jack and I, David O'Connor, was active in the Catholic Church, not particularly that one because he was Catholic, but once for All Saints, they asked us. Anybody remember this? They asked us to do a so-called Seder for them, which they called a Paschal meal. Anyone remember? Anybody come from TBC? It was about 20 years ago. So we went, we did, and they were very thrilled. And they have this idea that the Last Supper was a Seder. Yes. And I keep trying to explain to them there weren't any Seders. But, you know, don't tell them there weren't any Seders. There was no Haggadah. That was all made up after the Churban Habayit, after the temple was destroyed. They said, really? They didn't do it? Yeah, I said they may have had matzah, they may have had a meal, I'm saying, but there was no Seder. And then David, who's a Catholic, active in the Paulist Center downtown, asked me to do something at his home to do this kind of thing. And yes, for people who appreciate the roots of Christianity, you see, that's the thing. We don't need Christianity for our self-understanding, but Christians who really care about their self-understanding need to know about Judaism.
No, it's true.
You know, otherwise it doesn't work. They have to build on something, right? So they know what they have. We don't have to build on anything before us unless you want to talk about, you know, Babylonian religion or something. But for the most part, we have our own self-understanding. So what they really get from it is the fact that it works. The Seder works. That it's been going on for so long because it works. You're able to get across a simple message for people who never go to temple, who never show up for anything else. They show up for the Seder. They get this simple message that people should be free.
Amen.
Wow. And as you look at the world, we know that's certainly not the case yet for most of the world, where people are free. So that's really what they got. What you mean? You say you do this every year the same way? I said yes. Why? Because I want to make sure the message comes through. I want to make sure the message comes through. And I think people admire that in us. I think many non-Jews admire us and are fascinated by how we survived. Sometimes many more than Jews are. You know, I often see a big disparity about how converts are treated by people in some communities. Some ethnic Jews saying, I was born Jewish, I didn't have a choice. I don't know why in God's name you would choose this.
Exactly.
Right? And then the convert usually says, well, I did it because I find it very beautiful and meaningful and it enhances my life. And I say, really? I've never felt that. How is that possible? So that's why I say now every Jew has to become a Jew by choice. Basically, you know, we shouldn't think of ourselves as, oh, we're the chosen. No, we choose. We choose how we will live our lives. You know, we're the choosing people rather than the chosen people. And because all too often I meet people who take that chosen people concept and have this idea of superiority vis-a-vis other people. You know, that's not exactly what we're talking about. So it's 8:30, I believe. I'll see you next week. We'll wrap it all up. And one idea came up for a course that someone sent me. I don't know how many were in the 4 Jewish thinkers you never thought about class in July. Oh, quite a few. When we went to the last thinker, it was Arthur A. Cohen. And I gave everybody this story to read called The Last Jew on Earth. And someone suggested that I distribute that again to more people, get all the lists together of people who have taken classes with me, and then we all read it. It's a very long story, but it's a very fascinating story. I don't know if any of you did read it.
I forgot, yeah.
I read it.
It's a fascinating story. And maybe have a couple of sessions of discussion about it. I think that would be a nice way to do something that's accessible to everyone, etc. So I'll figure out the mechanics of that and then get to you. So what can I say? We say in Hebrew, Hodu Lashem Kitov.
Yeah, Hodu.
So Hodu in Hebrew is turkey. Because the story is that Columbus thought he was coming to India. Right, and he saw these birds which he had never seen because Turkey seemed to not be in any other place except in North America, it seems. So according to the legend, he had one fellow on the Nina or the Pinta or the Santa Maria, I forget which one, who was his translator, a guy named Torres, who was a converso.
Yeah.
Oh.
You know the story, right?
Yeah.
He was born a Jew. He had, for political purposes and to save his life, he converted. But he knew Hebrew very well. And supposedly he saw this bird and he didn't know what to call it. So he knew what, there's a couple of words for bird in the Torah, and one of them is tuki.
Oh, right.
Modern Hebrew means a parrot.
Yes.
Yeah, toucan.
Or a toucan, right? Tuki. So he looked at the bird, he said, tuki, and that became turkey. I wasn't there, so they say. It's possible. Stranger things have happened. So keep your Elijah spirit. Those of you who are, I just got a message that Gary Cohen has gotten out of his operation. I hope you know, anybody know Gary? Gary Cohen? He had a very serious spinal operation today. I'm glad to say he's better. Unfortunately, today also we had a funeral for Stuart Book. Some of you know Stuart. And the Shiva was tonight at 7, but there'll be Shiva tomorrow night and Wednesday night. I hope you will come. You didn't have to know Stuart to attend the Shiva. And you'll see it in the Baruch Diana Met that came out on Friday. There can be the Zoom link there. So I wish you all a happy Thanksgiving. I think some of the turkeys are happy. They may not have to die as much this year as they have in the years before. But what can I say? We all in this, we all have a lot to be thankful for.
Trump did not pardon a turkey.
How can you pardon the turkey? They're all guilty because they're Democrats. They're all the
But
Democrats.
it's just, he's so mean-spirited, he didn't even pardon a turkey.
You noticed.
There's nothing one can say. And
was
I'm glad
less
today. I'm glad
yeah.
at 6 o'clock they announced that they're going to start the transition.
Yeah,
and
yeah.
Finally.
money is coming through, so that's
Yeah.
good. But
Oh,
just
that's
remember
good.
Well, I just found out you
one
just
thing about Trump.
mentioned
He was
about,
a major force.
so I knew Stuart and I know Judith, so I guess I should come to the Shiva tomorrow.
It's up to you. You should. You
Yeah.
not should. It's up to you. You do what you feel like you like to do. But you know, he will be a thorn in the side of American culture for many years to come. So it's not going to be that easy to keep him off the scene. You know, he believes
Right.
that everything revolves around him. But
Okay.
he would look great in an orange jumpsuit. It would match his complexion and everything.
And
Well,
it's-
there's a fake cover, a fake time cover.
Yeah, I saw
that
of
has
him,
that
of
picture.
half of him and half of the jumpsuit. Right.
Yeah.
Well, Lomer Hoffen, let's hope.
Let
Hope
us hope.
springs eternal. And it's
Remember,
now
Rabbi,
spring. Yeah.
Rabbi, Gamzu,
Yes.
Gamzu,
Gamzula Tova. Gamzula Tova. Right. Gamzula Tova.
Hallelujah.
Hallelujah. Kol Tov Lechem. All the best. Good
Bye-bye.
night. Good night.
You
Good
too.
night.
Tov,
Laila Tov.
Oh, toda rabah.
Regards to everyone.
Leave.
Where's my, what happened to my leave meeting? Well, it'll go. Oh, here's my leave. Toodle. Toodle.